Hello BookTube, it's Roz, and by the time I upload this video, the results of the octafinals of the BookTube Prize will have been announced, and so this is my summary of the 6 books that I read from one of the fiction groups and how I rate them from, and we'll see how that matches up with the real result, what other people thought, and whether I'm in line or out of line, and will my favourite book get through to the next round. So, in time-honoured fashion, I will go through the 6 books that I read in this group, starting from the bottom. My book number 6, and number 6 was Small Mercies by Dennis Lehane. Now, first thing to say is this was not a bad book. On the contrary, it's a good example of a kind of thrillery, crimey sort of style of book, really decent with thriller come historical fiction, and they had 3 real strengths, I would say. One is the setting, the context, because that Lehane picked, because it's in Boston in the 1970s, at the point when they wanted to desegregate the public school system because, the schools for black neighbourhoods were just not good enough. And the solution that was come up with was to bus kids from one neighbourhood to another. And that was very disruptive and as an approach, I suppose, and provoked a lot of kind of protest from some neighbourhoods, that were there's sort of racism involved in that, but more complex than that, I think. And that's, the really interesting context for the book. And sort of second real strength, I suppose, was that Lehane seems to understand, was able to explain the sort of the culture of and feelings and politics of the sort of working class Boston Irish, and how that played out in the face of the prospect of busing, but the strengths and the flaws of that community. So that's 2 good things. Third great thing about the book was really enjoyably fierce female central character, the mother of the girl who goes missing, who is sort of passionate, dangerous, difficult, but also sort of sympathetic to the reader. So 3 great things. But essentially, this is my number 6, because I would say it's otherwise a kind of predictably enjoyable, thrillerish kind of book. Nothing wrong with it, but nothing amazing either. In that thrillery way, plot is central. So although the characters were strong, at times their words or actions were sort of chosen to fit the needs of the plot rather than something that would perhaps be convincing within the character for me. There was sort of obvious characters like the cop who's hard bitten and on the exterior but has a heart of gold and really feels for people, or the gangster come mob leader who portrays himself as family man and protector of the community, pillar of the community, but is actually cynical and selfish and heartless. So those, we've seen those characters before. They work great in a thriller, no problem with that. But at times sentences were quite clunky. As I say, a good example of what it is, but number 6 in this context. So, what was my number 5? Now, this one will be a lot more controversial. Okay, so I'm going to sit back and wait for people to throw things at me, because my number 5 was The Bee Sting by Paul Murray, and I've heard so many people enthuse about this book. It was lots of people's favourite of last year, and so I went into it expecting to enjoy it, and found that it was just not a book for me. It's big, emotional family story that also deals with sort of big issues, serious issues, and I guess that's maybe that's not my sort of thing, particularly in a modern book. I might enjoy that more in a, if it were Dickens or, I don't know, Trollope or something, I'd enjoy it more. It felt very long, unnecessarily long for me, and I got quite frustrated with it at times. I'm not sure. I wonder if I would have DNF'd it if it wasn't for the BookTube Prize. I don't know. I'm not sure. It's character based. Nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. What I found was that the different sections of the book really varied in how well they worked for me, and some were superb and some just weren't. The impression I got was that what Murray wanted was to give all the members of this family kind of equal billing, an equal share, to show all their stories in kind of equal detail and give them the same weight. But some of them just work better than others for me. So like the teenage daughter felt a bit to me like a sort of an adult's idea of how teenagers think and behave. I mean, likewise, the 12-year-old boy, the son, PJ, that, really, no, I'm losing words to describe, how it just he felt implausible. No elements of him worked, things about some of his friendships and dealing with other people his own age, but at other times you just thought like, no, you wouldn't do that, or why would you? That just doesn't. Anyway, the two parents much stronger, and their own sections, particularly the mother, were superb, and I could have read like one of those as a sort of standalone short novel and thought, wow, this is brilliant, But the problem for me was that although they worked really well in themselves, I often felt like the inner voice of those characters in their sections and their outer actions in the story as a whole didn't match up, didn't tally, didn't ring true. Stories about kind of interrelationships where failed communication is key. That's valid. Absolutely, that happens. That is, that's what human relationships are all about. Do we manage to communicate and understand each other or not? But this felt, I don't know, exaggerated. It felt like no one ever tried to sort of reach out and connect with each other, or it and part of that was about past trauma in their lives, but they're the way they related to the children. I don't know. Yeah, for me, I don't know. People seem to make too many unlikely choices in order for the overall plot to work. At the same time, I would acknowledge really clever structure. There's lots of foreshadowing. If you pay attention early on, there are sort of patterns in the book that help you understand what's going on and get, we go back and forth in time in a really different way. I like books that follow different, use different voices and create a whole. It was often really lovely at sentence level. The whole thing about the woods at the back of the house, and there's many things in the book that did work, and it could have been cut down to a book that I thought was brilliant, but overall no. And one reason for that, I think, is one of Murray's stylistic skills is building tension. In this book, building tension and then maybe having the thing that you fear not happen. But he just played that trick multiple times, and so it stopped having that impact for me. Anyway, you can all tell me why I'm horribly wrong and why that, it's outrageous that I put it at my number 5, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if the book went through to the next round. So there we go. What was my number 4? Okay. This was another book that I had quite mixed feelings about and found elements of were very successful for me and others kind of knocked it back. And that was Big Swiss by Jen Beagin. US writer. It's her third novel. The premise for this book is absolutely brilliant. Okay, it's a woman who's moved to a small town and takes a job transcribing the therapy sessions of a therapist for his record. So she gets sent tapes of these therapy sessions. He's a sort of sex and relationships therapist, and she has to transcribe them. But because it's a small town, she starts to recognise the voices, of the people on the tapes and work out who they are, and sort of starts to obsess about some of them, one in particular. And so, brilliant idea for a book. Full marks for that. It's got the kind of funny, sad combination that is something I can really enjoy in a book. Where someone can pull that off, that's brilliant. I really like the way Beagin used the transcripts in the structure of the book, and it's full of ideas about secrets, about trauma, about love, about sort of sexual relationships and what sex means to people. So all strengths. But there are things about the book that I found a bit irritating. There are things like, there's this sort of recurring thing about there being bees in the house where she's living. There's things about broken window panes, the place sort of fallen to pieces a bit, that felt, I don't know, too artfully quirky. Does that make sense? Yeah, I think you probably know what I mean. When you think like, you're putting that in because it's sort of, isn't that fun to add that kind of quirkiness to the book? And there were other kind of bits like that did work for me, like the miniature donkeys were a big win. And I loved the scenes in the dog park. Oh, brilliant. She can write. Absolutely, Beagin can write, and I would definitely read another book for her. She kind of laughs at therapy speak, but also kind of buys into it a bit. Yeah, I don't know, in perhaps a cultural way that's a bit alien to me. It might work better if you lived in a culture where that, more people go to therapy, and it, I don't know. Yeah, I've slightly sort of, didn't do it for me. My other complaint about this book, and please don't laugh at me for this, is I'm going to say there was too much sex in it. Obviously, it's about a sex therapist, but sometimes you get quite laborious detail, physical detail about, people having sex. Just, I think. I suppose it would have been odd to write this book without putting that in, but that doesn't mean that it sort of is particularly sort of interesting or vivid. However, this is a book that I would say do read. Loads in it to enjoy, loads in it that will make you smile, loads in it that you will also find, quite moving and interesting. So it's on the positive, but it's just wasn't as good for me as my top three. So, what came in at number 3? Okay, now sometimes when you read for the BookTube Prize, one of the wonderful things about it is that it brings you to books that you somehow missed when they were originally published, and this is the case of, and haven't really heard anything much about, and this is the case of this one. So this was Loved and Missed by Susie Boyt, and I'm always surprised that I didn't sort of pick it up at the time when it was originally published by a UK author. I think it was actually a 2022 book in the UK, but it was published in the US in 2023, hence being in this year's BookTube Prize. Now, this is, well, if you watch this channel, you will know that one thing I love in a book is something that is short but intense. That really appeals to me. Good things in small packages, that's something I love, if it's done well. And this was that kind of a book. I also really like a difficult main character, someone who's, the sympathetic but flawed thing is, I'll buy into that multiple times. and particularly if it's, I particularly enjoy that perhaps in an older character. So this book is kind of about 4 generations of women and sort of generational sort of sadness and trauma, but it really focuses in on 2, and particularly what I will call the mother. So the mother, and she ends up almost kidnapping her granddaughter because her daughter is lost in a sort of substance misuse existence that means she can't care properly for her baby. And so this is about being a kinship carer, and having a second go at parenthood with a grandchild. It's what can I say? It's a book about disappointment and failure and the mistakes we make, and the mistakes we make willfully, and the mistakes we make accidentally, and the mistakes we make despite our very best efforts not to make those mistakes. It's about how we relate to our parents and our children, mothers, daughters, and if that sounds rather sort of grim, I mean, it is at times grim, but it also has a sort of thread around sort of I don't know, sort of love and redemption in there that makes it bearable as a read. It is piercingly raw at times, and I felt very sort of emotionally accurate. It did move me to tears. There's an interesting shift, kind of quite a long way through what is a short book, where characters that have been sort of on the periphery come to the centre, and that worked for me. It made it, if it had stopped before that the book would have been less satisfying. I'm trying to avoid spoilers here. I know I've said that big family melodrama sort of stories often don't work for me, but because this was somehow more subtle, more intense, more succinct, more realistic, and as I say, I was genuinely moved by it. Definitely a book I'm really glad to have found through the BookTube Prize. So that was number 3. What was number 2? Number 2 was Vaster Wilds by Lauren Groff. Now, this is interesting to me because it was a book that I devoured very fast. I read it fast and furiously, I would say. And that's a good sign that I was enjoying it. I think it probably also meant that I was able to, kind of skim over what may have been flaws in this book, that someone reading it more slowly may notice more and have made them feel differently about it. But I was just totally up for going for the ride with this one, and treating it almost like a fable. So not always necessarily totally realistic. So you could pick holes in it, I suppose, is what I'm going to say. But somehow the way Groff wrote it meant that I didn't want to pick those holes. Its premise is that there's a young woman who is escaping from a settlement of early European settlers in North America, and escapes to the woods because there's disease and famine in the settlement, but also because something has happened which we don't, there's a little mystery there that we sort of guess, but and the story is about how she survives or not in the woods, and it's, I suppose, the ideas in the book are about nature and our relationship with nature and the environment, about faith, which is interesting, and what that might mean and how that might sustain or damage people. It definitely about patriarchy, and kind of colonists' arrogance, but also their weakness in an alien environment where an indigenous population is able to thrive. But of course, we know what is going to come in North America, don't we? And in that relationship, there's elements in the style, the way it's written, that are kind of quite repetitive, which I suspect some readers will dislike or see as a weakness. I actually found that a stylistic strength. I suppose it went with that kind of fable-like quality for me. I really loved the central voice, you know, the young woman in the story. I also loved the kind of physicality of the book, you know, the detail about physical sensations, and yeah, how things felt, and yeah. As I was reading it, I was thinking there was a slightly implausible element to some of the ways that she found food, the ways she was able to catch things or forage for things. Now, interestingly, just after I read it, I was talking to Tilly, my daughter of Tilly's Shelf, about a book that she read called Feral, which talks about how we miscalculate or misunderstand how sort of what the population was of things like fish and animals before sort of European style exploitation of the environment, you know. So what our idea of what is a natural population or a natural level of you know, plant life and so on is distorted. And so actually, you know, it may be that it's less implausible than I was perhaps thinking as I was reading it. Altogether, I found it a really exhilarating read, and you know, so pleased that I came to read it through the BookTube Prize. I probably would have read it anyway because I love Matrix as well, her previous book. I think you may know if Lauren Groff is a writer for you or not, but she's definitely. This is my second of hers, and I loved both books, although they're quite different. So, what does that put in the number one spot for me? It's this one. Oh God's Time by Sebastian Barry, another Irish author. Now, this is the only book out of the 6 that I had read before the BookTube Prize group, and I read it last year, and it was one of my kind of most memorable reads of 2023. I did take care to get a copy out of the library, as you can see, and kind of reread chunks and sort of skim through and just check that it was as good as I remembered it, and that it did deserve to be my number one. I think, you know, all the way as I was reading the other 5 books, I was thinking, will anything be better than this? And no, nothing was better than this. I really think this is quite a special novel. Sebastian Barry is such a good author. What to say about it? It starts out feeling like what it's going to be is some sort of police procedural thriller mystery kind of crime book, you know. So we've got a retired cop and some younger ex-colleagues come along to ask him about a cold case and try and get him involved in helping to solve it. You know, so far so predictable. Boy, that is not what this book is. It's multi-layered, complex, rich, moving, fascinating, lyrical. Yeah. There is a mystery to it, which does have to be which does get solved for the reader, at least. But that's, in a way, that's not the main point of the book at all. It's a book about memory and love, about grief, about historic trauma, and, you know, Ireland's you know, mother and baby homes and orphanages and Magdalen laundries, all of that. You know, that they are kind of key to the book. Ultimately, it's about what we may be prepared to do for the ones that we love. Characters, brilliant characters in the book. The prose is quite lyrical. I think perhaps that might be off-putting for some people. It's something that really appeals to me, works really well for me. Another thing that I really liked about the book, which I know some people maybe a turn off for some people, is it has lots of time switches. You know, we move back and forth, and sometimes because the main character has issues around memory and so on, and, you know, it's a brilliant unreliable narrator. Oh, I love an unreliable narrator. This one is superb. But sometimes that's confusing. As you're reading it, you're thinking, hang on, where are we here? What's going on? And then another element in that confusion is there's a kind of a possible supernatural element to the book. You know, characters that maybe turn out to be kind of ghosts, or are they, you know, not literally ghosts, but more like an element in his sort of psychological makeup and what he sees and understands and responds to. You can gather that I rate this book really, really highly, absolutely worthy number one for me, and I will be shocked if this doesn't go through to the next round. There you go.